You know those Guy Ritchie movies about British street gangsters like Snatch and The Gentleman, where even though the main character is doing violent crimes and selling drugs, whatever, you still find yourself rooting for them? Well, what if I told you there was a former UFC fighter who, despite being a convicted high-level criminal, the fans rooted for and was generally beloved in the MMA community? Lee Murray was the self-proclaimed notorious one. In an interview from his Moroccan jail cell, Lee Murray took issue with Conor McGregor calling himself the notorious one. Murray said something along the lines of, "While Conor McGregor was getting tucked in by his mom, I was out running the streets doing real notorious stuff." Lee Murray was a top-tier fighter who managed to go the distance with possibly the greatest fighter of all time, Anderson Silva, and later managed to pull off the largest cash robbery in the world during peacetime, ever. Murray lived a crazy life, a life involving dealing drugs, stabbings, street fights, harassing police officers, and eventually, bank robberies. Hard to believe this story's real, right? A world-class MMA fighter who reached the pinnacle of the sport while simultaneously running an entire drug ring. This is the story of Lee Murray, the real notorious one.
I'm Lee Murray from London, England. I'm a Valley Judo fighter. I come here to fight today in the alternate bout. I don't know nothing about the guy that I'm fighting, so I just wait and see what happens.
Murray was born and raised in a rough neighborhood in South London. Murray's dad was Moroccan and his mom was British. Murray grew up in a part of South London known as Old Kent Road. It was once said about Old Kent Road that this place was a breeding ground for professional criminals, specifically those specializing in armed robberies. Now, it's said that Lee really got into crime when he learned to fight and be crazy when he had enough of his alcoholic, abusive dad, finally fought back and knocked his dad out cold. Once this happened, Lee was almost addicted to the sensation of being the alpha. As Lee got into his teenage years, he started feeling more powerful and got even more committed, so to speak, to his life on the streets. Lee and his homies originally got together to protect their neighborhood from rivaling neighborhoods. And if you know anything about rough neighborhoods, you know that pride might be as valuable as money. Lee and his crew began calling themselves the Butt Marsh Boys. Funny name for a bunch of street gangsters, but anyways. Lee emerged as the alpha of this crew and was known as the leader of the Butt Marsh Boys. Alongside his childhood friend from school, Paul Allen, who also became a professional MMA fighter alongside Murray, they led this crew into different rackets such as selling cocaine, weed, Grand Theft Auto, any way to make a quick buck. Now, Lee and Paul Allen themselves became maybe the most feared guys around the neighborhood, as everyone knew they were trained in unarmed combat as well. Murray would eventually be locked up for possession of weed and cocaine. When he got out, he found himself wanting to dedicate himself more to fighting and started actually pursuing a career in MMA. He became known as a knockout artist and saw his fame in England grow rapidly. With Murray's success, along with the success of some of his teammates, their gym, London Shoot Fighters, became a world-renowned gym. London Shoot Fighters is actually now home of this guy on the far right, enigmatic Bellator fighter Michael Venom Page. If you haven't seen this guy fight, go look up a YouTube highlight video of him after this. So as Murray's already rising in popularity, something else happens that makes him even more popular. You recognize this guy? That's Tito Ortiz, one of the most hated fighters of all time, if I'm being honest. I got nothing against him. but that's just how it was. So before Murray's even fighting in the UFC, he's on a night out with guys like Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Matt Hughes, UFC legends, right? So they're partying, everything's all good. One of Tito's friends puts Murray in a headlock, but I guess he was kind of joking. Well, Murray's crew didn't know it was a joke. So before you know it, he puts that guy in a headlock, a real one though, and all hell breaks loose. Check out this quote from UFC Hall of Famer Matt Hughes. So during the scuffle, Murray and Ortiz face off. Tito throws a left hook at Murray and misses. Right as he missed, Murray counters with a 5-punch combo, hitting Tito right on the chin, knocking him out. Now, whether this actually happened is up for debate. Chuck Liddell doesn't think it happened, but either way, it added to the myth of Lee Murray. He's becoming so popular. People didn't like Tito. This was kind of launching him into mythical status. Murray's reputation of being a true gangster and a badass was growing quickly. When Murray signed with the UFC in 2004, Dana White said about him, "He's a scary son of a bitch, and I don't mean as a fighter." People couldn't wait for this guy's debut. In January 2004, Murray debuted against Jorge Rivera, who was a solid fighter, not a world beater, but definitely solid competition. By the way, to add to the myth, he walked out in this. Yeah, he's crazy. Murray ended up beating Rivera in round 1, submitting him with the triangle armbar. If you want to know what that is, go look it up. Kind of hard to explain right here in this video. But nonetheless, sweet move, awesome debut for Murray. But just as this guy's career starts to gain ground, this happens. He goes out to a nightclub with his homies, and shit pops off, and he gets stabbed in the head. Read this quote about blood shooting out of his chest. I mean, this guy is literally living a Guy Ritchie movie. It's insane. Now, clearly, Murray's still running with the rough crew. Whether or not he's still active in the streets and dealing drugs and things like that, who knows? Murray was rushed to the hospital where he was resuscitated 4 times, somehow survives, miraculously. I mean, the guy's a movie character. Now, after getting all healed up, in September 2004, Murray went on to fight legend Anderson Silva. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but Anderson Silva arguably peaked before he went to the UFC. So Murray caught Anderson Silva in his prime. Though ultimately losing a unanimous decision, Murray fought well, and Silva was so good at this time, it was a feather in your cap just to go the distance with him. So unfortunately, this would kind of be the beginning of the end for Murray's MMA career due to visa issues and court case ongoing back home in England, stemming from when he had a road rage incident in which he beat the living shit out of another driver. I mean, terrifying. The UFC couldn't carry on with him and couldn't get him any more fights. Now, this is where Murray's life gets even crazier than it already was. Murray had the grand idea to plot the biggest bank heist ever in human history. With his crew of career criminals, Murray figured out a way, using kidnapping, an inside man who worked at this cash depot, to figure out a way to steal straight from this Securitas depot in Old Kent. This depot was a place where large amounts of British pounds were kept, newly printed. So Murray and his crew ran into this cash depot with AK-47s and something called a Scorpion gun, and ended up taking as much cash as they needed to. These crazy bastards bagged 53 million pounds, or by today's exchange rate, 73 million US dollars. And they were also said to have left 2 times that amount back in the depot because they couldn't fit any more cash in their bags. Now, after they pulled this off, Murray fled to Morocco, where he was eventually caught and thrown in jail for this crime, amongst others. Somehow Murray managed to avoid extradition and was locked up in a Moroccan jail, originally sentenced for 10 years, which was later increased to 25 years. Fun fact, by the way, 32 million of the 53 million pounds that were stolen were never recovered. So these crazy bastards actually pulled this off. I mean, I could go on for days about crazy stories about this guy. So I'm just going to tell you one more and wrap this thing up, because this could be an entire movie. While in this Moroccan jail, Murray managed to smuggle in drugs, designer clothes, and most importantly, small saws. And he was slowly sawing the bars of his jail cell window, while ironically, simultaneously cutting weight like he did when he was fighting, so he could get as small as possible and slip through the bars. Now, the other prisoners didn't really like Murray because he had all this money, the designer clothes. Apparently he wasn't sharing the love. But anyways, one of them saw him working in his cell and basically blew up this plan. So he never even truly got to attempt it. To this day, Murray is still in this prison in Morocco. Now, of course, Mr. Gangster Optimism himself isn't just going to sit there. He thinks he's getting out. Now, not only does he plan on getting out, he plans on fighting professionally again. And not only does he plan on fighting professionally again, he dreams of being UFC champion one day. I mean, say what you want about this dude, but he might be the most optimistic human I've ever come across. Now, all jokes aside, it does suck to see someone who clearly has talent locked up in jail, wasting away. As you can see by his record here, Lee Murray clearly had potential. I mean, keep in mind in MMA, a lot of people lose a lot early in their career. For him to finish out with only 2 losses, I mean, that's legit. So I'll leave you with this. A quote from the Notorious himself explaining why he believes he's the real Notorious. Now, I kind of disagree. I think Conor's a pretty wild man, and he can be called Notorious if he wants. He's a bad motherfucker. But, I mean, at the same time, hard to argue. So whatever you think about Lee Murray after watching this video, whatever your stance is, you can't argue that he's one of the baddest dudes to ever live. But at the same time, he's still only 43. Maybe he'll do some more crazy shit that I'll have to make another video about. So anyways, cheers to the real Notorious one. Can't wait to see what you do next.